Will you be my mom's Valentine? She loves Valentine.
Of course I will, if that will make her wake up.
Triplets Valentine's wish for mother's recovery. A love built in Surreal. The Lagos rain fell with a relentless, rhythmic intensity, drumming against the corrugated iron roof of the small but meticulously kept apartment in Surreal. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of melon seed soup, oaf egusi, simmering on the stove and with dreams just beginning to take shape. Kayamika Okoro, her fingers nimble and sure, pinned a delicate lace trim to the neckline of an osso oak blouse spread across their small dining table, which also served as her work desk. Her mind, however, was only half on her craft. The other half was on the man pacing slowly by the window, watching the downpour blur the lines of the neighboring buildings. Tunde Kinwale was a man who carried his thoughts like physical weights. An electrical engineer by trade and a visionary by nature, he saw systems, structures, and solutions where others saw only wires and switches. Lately, his blueprints were for a life not yet built. Chia, he said, his voice a soft rumble that always settled her. Look at this ring. It washes everything clean, makes space for new growth. Kayamika smiled, not looking up. Is this your poetic way of telling me the leak in the bedroom corner is back? He chuckled, the sound warm in the humid room. No, that I will fix on Saturday. I'm talking about us. He came to sit beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. He took her hand, stilling the busy needle. The contract with the new hotel in Lekki, it's looking very promising. More than promising. If it comes through, it will change everything. She met his eyes then, seeing the fierce hope and profound anxiety warring within them. They had been living together in this cocoon of their making for 2 years, a boyfriend and girlfriend against the cautious whispers of their more traditional families. Their love was a settled, certain thing, a bedrock. But Tund was a man of deep principle, forged by the stern love of his father, a retired school headmaster. To him, marriage was not a romantic flourish. It was a fortress to be constructed with the strongest materials before one sought shelter within it. He would not ask her to marry him until he was certain he could provide not just a home, but a future. Everything is already changed, Tund, she said softly, placing her other hand over his. She took a deep breath, the secret she had been carrying for 3 weeks now pressing against her heart. The rain, it's already brought new growth. She saw the moment he understood. His eyes widened, flicked down to her still flat stomach, and then back to her face. A torrent of emotions surged in his expression, shock, instant joy, then a swift, crushing wave of responsibility. Kayamika, he breathed her name like a prayer and a question. I am pregnant, she confirmed, the words both a confession and a celebration. For a long moment, he was silent, his grip on her hands tightening. The rain lashed the window. Then, he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick, muffled against her hair. We will keep it. We will keep our child. I will build a foundation so strong for us, my love. A foundation of cement and iron, not just love and promises. He leaned back, cradling her face in his large, work-roughened hands. His eyes were shining. Do you hear me? I will marry you. Not today, not in this rush. But when I can look your father in the eye and tell him his daughter and his grandchild will want for nothing essential. When I can give you the wedding that reflects the queen you are, not the one my wallet can only whisper about now. It was not the dramatic, knee-jerk proposal one might see in films. It was something better, a covenant, a solemn, strategic plan born of deep love and profound respect. Kayamika, a practical dreamer herself, understood him completely. Her joy was not dimmed, but amplified by his seriousness. He was not saying wait, he was saying watch me build. And so, their planning took on a new, urgent dimension. The apartment became a war room of hope. Tun's architectural sketches now included a nursery nook. He took on extra freelance jobs, repairing generators and wiring whole buildings, coming home long after dark with the smell of solder and sweat on his clothes. Kayamika's sewing machine hummed late into the night, filling orders for bridal trousseaux and party dresses. Every naira saved tucked into a patterned box she called the future fund. They would lie on their backs on the modest rug late at night, hands intertwined over the gentle swell that was beginning to form, and map the stars of their life to be. The child will have your intelligence, Kayamika would muse. And your stubborn spirit, Tund would counter, grinning. We'll get a bigger place in Bagata, perhaps, with a balcony for plants. And a proper workshop for me. A proper studio for you. They'll go to good schools. They'll know they are loved. They will. Tund would vow, kissing her forehead. They will. Their love story was no longer just a romance. It was a construction project. Every saved naira was a brick. Every late night of work was a beam laid. And the life growing within Kayamika was the precious, demanding reason for it all. They were building their fortress in Surulere, one dream, one sacrifice, one shared look of determination at a time, while the Lagos rain, both relentless and cleansing, beat down outside, promising a tomorrow they were determined to earn. 3 cries of joy. The morning Kayamika's water broke, a strange calm settled over the Surulere apartment. It was not the frantic, screeching tire drama of Nollywood films. Instead, it was a quiet, purposeful hastening. Tund, who had rehearsed this moment a dozen times in his head, moved with a steady, mechanical efficiency that belied the earthquake of emotion inside him. He grabbed the pre-packed hospital bag, helped Kayamika into their slightly temperamental Volkswagen Beetle, and navigated the chaotic Lagos traffic with a surgeon's focus, one hand constantly reaching over to squeeze her knee. At the hospital, the calm dissolved into a whirlwind of clinical bustle. Hours stretched, punctuated by Kayamika's gritted teeth and Tund's murmured prayers, his forehead pressed against her damp hand. When the doctor, during a routine check, paused and his eyebrows shot up, the world tilted. Mr. Akinwale, the doctor said, his voice carefully neutral. We are seeing more than one heartbeat. A significant number more. Tund's mind, trained for complex calculations, went blank. Twins, he managed to croak. The doctor's smile was brief. Let's just get Mrs. Akinwale into delivery, and we will see what God has planned. What God had planned, it turned out, was a symphony. The first cry was a sharp, insistent solo, a strong, protesting wail that filled the delivery room. Ada. Before the echo had faded, a second, slightly softer but no less determined cry harmonized with it. Aisha. And then, as if completing a divine chord, a third, mellower cry joined the chorus. Amina. Triplets. Tund, who had been holding his breath until he saw stars, crumpled onto a stool, tears streaming down his face unchecked. He was a father, 3 times over. When they placed the first bundled infant, tiny, red, and miraculously complete, into his trembling arms, he felt a shift in the very axis of his soul. Here was a purpose more profound than any contract, a responsibility more terrifying and magnificent than any electrical grid he would ever design. Kayamika, exhausted and radiant, looked at the 3 clear plastic bassinets wheeled to her bedside. Our foundation, she whispered, her voice hoarse but lit with wonder. You said you'd build one. They are the foundation. The news sent ripples through both families. Mama Tund arrived first, a whirlwind of practical energy. She took one look at the 3 squirming bundles and clapped her hands to her head. You 3 at once. Tund, my son, you have outdone yourself. She immediately set up a rotation system, commandeering the small apartment, boiling soups of bitter leaf and scent leaf to help Kayamika's milk come in, and swaddling the babies with a militaristic precision. Mama Kayamika followed, bringing a different kind of magic. Where Tund's mother organized, Kayamika's mother soothed. She sang old Igbo lullabies, her voice a soft, rhythmic balm. She told Kayamika stories of her own early motherhood, normalizing the overwhelm. The village may call them Achimbo, multiple birth, she said, gently rocking a fussy Amina. But I call them a triple blessing. See how they share the load. One cries, you feed her, the other 2 wait their turn. They already know how to be a community. And indeed, an uncanny synergy seemed to surround the girls. When one was bathed and content, the others often settled. They slept in a tangle of limbs in the single crib Tund had hastily reinforced, their synchronized breathing a soft, living music. But the synergy extended beyond their tiny selves. It was as if their 3 collective breaths had blown a wind of favor into their parents' sails. The very week they came home from the hospital, Tund received a call. The Lekki Hotel contract was not just his. The project manager, impressed by his detailed bid and hearing through a mutual acquaintance about the triplets, offered him a lead role with a budget that made Tun's knees weak. It was more than a job. It was a career catapult. For Kayamika, a client who owned a popular fashion boutique in Acadia came to visit, bearing 3 tiny, handmade dresses. She saw Kayamika's designs, half-finished but elegant, pinned around the apartment. A month later, a spread in Today's Woman magazine featured a rising star designer, balancing motherhood and magic, with beautiful photos of Kayamika sketching while her triplet girls slept in a sun-drenched pile nearby. Orders began to trickle, then flood in. The apartment, once a quiet haven for 2 dreamers, was now a vibrant, chaotic hub of life and prosperity. Diapers hung like festive flags on a drying line. The hum of Kayamika's sewing machine blended with the gurgles and coos from the crib. Tun's blueprints were now often reviewed with a baby sleeping on his chest, her tiny heartbeat a steady rhythm against his own. The girls, with their identical, dark button eyes and smiles that emerged like sudden sunbeams, were their parents' lucky charms. Neighbors and friends would visit just to tap from the blessing. The grandmothers, in their alternating shifts, would argue fondly over who each girl resembled most, their presence ensuring the new parents never drowned in the beautiful exhaustion. One evening, with the 3 babies finally asleep and the apartment quiet save for the distant sounds of the city, Tund wrapped his arms around Kayamika as she stood at the sink. He nuzzled her neck, breathing in the scent of baby powder and her own unique fragrance. "You see," he murmured, gazing at the 3 perfect shadows in the crib. "I told you I would build a foundation. I just didn't know it would be built with giggles and tears and 3 little hearts beating next to ours." Kayamika leaned back into him, watching their daughters sleep. Their fortress was no longer made of dreams and blueprints. It was built, it was breathing, and it was, most wonderfully, 3 little goddesses of good luck. Time, in the presence of the triplets, did not flow in a linear stream, but in a series of bright, overlapping seasons. The gurgling newborn phase gave way to the chubby-thighed, exploratory stage of infancy, which itself dissolved into the glorious chaos of toddlerhood. Ada, Aisha, and Amina were a unit, a small, moving constellation of identical faces and distinct, emerging personalities. Ada, the firstborn by mere minutes, was the de facto spokesperson. She had a determined set to her jaw and eyes that missed nothing. She was the first to point at a bird, the first to demand, "Why?" in her broken, earnest English, the first to try and wrestle a toy from a playmate's grasp. She carried the weight of leadership, often turning to check on her sisters before embarking on any adventure. Aisha was their engine of mischief and boldness. Where Ada considered, Aisha acted. She was the first to climb out of the crib, necessitating Tun's hasty engineering of a triple-height safety barricade, the first to stuff a handful of Gary into her mouth straight from the sack, her face a mask of shocked delight. Her laugh was a loud, infectious belly chuckle that could dissolve any tension. Amina, the last to arrive, was their gentle harmonizer. She possessed a quiet, observing wisdom. She was often content to sit with a single rag doll, whispering secrets to it, her large eyes calmly taking in the whirlwind of her sisters. She was the peacemaker, the one who would pat a crying Aisha's back or offer Ada her own pacifier. Her presence was a steady, soothing current beneath their lively surface. Their home was no longer the small Surelier apartment. The promise Tund had whispered during the rain had materialized into a bright, airy duplex in Bogota, with a sun-drenched balcony for Kayamika's plants and a proper, well-ventilated workshop for Tund off the carport. The walls were adorned not with expensive art, but with the girls' finger-painted masterpieces and framed magazine clippings of Kayamika's designs. The nickname given to them by a visiting auntie stuck, Ewan Omo Olarun, the children of God. But in the local parlance of the neighborhood market women and the drivers who knew their father, they were the small goddesses of good luck. It seemed their very existence greased the wheels of fortune. Tund's reputation as the engineer with the blessed hands spread. Contracts didn't just come, they sought him out. A major telecoms company hired him to oversee the wiring of their new headquarters, a project that landed his photo in the business pages. He'd come home smelling of site dust and success, only to be immediately mobbed by 3 tiny forces of nature chanting, "Daddy, Daddy, up, up." Kayamika's Chia's Elegance brand evolved from a home studio into a proper atelier on Allen Avenue, with 2 apprentices. Her designs, once described as pretty, were now hailed as innovative fusions of tradition and modern flair. The triplets were her muses and her most effective marketing. Photo shoots often featured the girls in miniature versions of her creations, their identical, joyful faces beaming from shop windows and social media feeds, drawing clients who wanted a piece of that palpable joy. The grandmother's rotations became a cherished ritual. Mama Tun's weeks were filled with the strict, loving order of Yoruba proverbs and hearty, bone-building soups. She taught the girls to count in Yoruba, her voice firm and proud. Ianida mo ohun tnl, ki ipata ni ku ku, she would say. One who knows what is happening does not become a laggard. The girls would parrot the words, their tiny voices serious. Mama Kayamika's turns were a world of Igbo folklore and softer, aromatic dishes. She would tell them stories of Mami Wada and the cunning tortoise, her voice weaving spells in the twilight. She filled the house with the scent of Yuziza and the gentle strumming of an old Ojin melody. She taught them that strength could be quiet, like the deep roots of the Irako tree. The girls thrived in this dual heritage, switching effortlessly between Baba and Daddy, sister and Nwanam, soaking up the love and culture from both sides. Their combined presence was a force field of positivity. Neighbors would smile just seeing them take a walk, a triple stroller like a chariot of delight. Those Kinwale girls, people would say, nodding sagely. Where they are, goodness follows. One Saturday afternoon, Tund was in his workshop, struggling with a complex circuit design for a solar-powered system. He'd been stuck for hours, frustration mounting. The door squeaked open, and 3 small figures filed in, covered in chalk dust from the driveway. Without a word, Amina climbed onto his lap and laid her head on his chest. Aisha started organizing his screws by size, her tongue poked out in concentration. Ada stood by his elbow, pointing at the blueprint. Light from sun, she stated, with the absolute authority of a 3-year-old. Yes, light from sun, Tun sighed. Daddy make it work, she said, patting his arm. You smart. At that moment, looking from Ada's faith-filled face to Aisha's diligence sorting to Amina's comforting weight, the mental block shattered. The solution appeared in his mind, clear and elegant. He laughed, a sound of pure relief and wonder, and gathered all 3 of them into a hug, smearing chalk dust on his shirt. You're right, Ada. Daddy will make it work, he said, his voice thick. You girls, you are my brightest light. They were more than luck. They were the living, breathing manifestation of his and Kayamika's love, a triple-threaded cord that was strengthening not just their family, but everything they touched. The foundation was not only secure, it was blessed, and upon it, a palace of joy was being built, one giggle, one contract, one design at a time. The promise on a plate. The December harmattan wind was a playful sculptor, dusting the Bagada neighborhood with fine, red powder and coaxing shivers from the leaves of the almond trees. Inside the Akinwale home, however, warmth reigned supreme. The air vibrated with the electric joy of 3 little girls who had just celebrated their 4th birthday. Wrappings from presents, a miniature doctor's kit, a set of vibrant plastic beads, 3 identical stuffed elephants, lay scattered like confetti across the sitting room floor. The scent of birthday cake, a towering creation of pink frosting and sugar roses, still lingered sweetly. You are big girls now, Kayamika declared, tickling Amina, who dissolved into a fit of giggles. 4 years old. Can you believe it? She looked at Tund over their daughters' heads, her eyes shining with a love that felt both brand new and ancient as the hills. He met her gaze, and in that silent exchange was the memory of the Surrealire apartment, the rain, the fear, the hope, and this magnificent, chaotic fruit of it all. The festive season passed in a blur of church services, visits to grandparents in Abadan and Enugu, and the girls' endless, delighted rediscovery of their Christmas toys. As January bled into February, an idea, quiet but insistent, began to take root in Tun's heart. It had been there, perhaps, since the day he'd asked her to keep the pregnancy. It had grown with each of the girls' firsts, their first steps, their first words. It had been tempered by every challenge overcome and solidified by every shared success. The fortress was built. The palace was alive with laughter. It was time to make it official, not just in spirit, but in the sight of God and everyone. He planned it with the precision of one of his electrical grids, every detail a carefully placed conduit for emotion. He chose the restaurant not for its staggering opulence, but for its quiet elegance, a place on Victoria Island with soft lighting, white linen, and a view of the lagoon shimmering under the emerging evening stars. He told Kayamika it was simply a celebration. For surviving 4 years with 3 tornadoes, he'd joked, pulling her close. For us. On the afternoon of February 14th, Kayamika dressed the girls in matching dresses of deep rose pink, with satin sashes that tied in big bows at the back. She herself wore a simple but stunning navy blue gown she had designed, its elegance in the cut rather than fussy detail. Tund, watching her slide gold earrings into her ears, felt his breath catch. She was more beautiful to him now than she had ever been. A mother, a creator, his partner in this magnificent, exhausting life. The dinner was, at first, perfectly normal. The girls, perched on booster seats, were on their best behavior, wide-eyed at the crystal glasses and the multitude of forks. Aisha attempted to drink her water with a spoon, causing Ada to roll her eyes in a perfect imitation of Mama Tund. Amina quietly arranged her bread rolls into a little family on her plate. They ate their specially ordered chicken and chips, their chatter a soft, happy hum under the gentle strains of a live pianist. Kayamika was relaxed, laughing at the girls' antics, her hand finding tons across the table. She spoke of a new fabric shipment, of Mama Kayamika's latest visit. She was happy, content in this bubble of normal, familial bliss. As the dessert plates were cleared, the girls' faces smeared with chocolate mousse, the pianist shifted seamlessly into a softer, familiar melody. You are my sunshine. Tun's hand tightened around hers. He took a slow, deep breath, the kind he took before connecting the final, crucial wires of a system. Kayamika, he said, his voice lower than usual. She turned to him, a smile still playing on her lips. Yes, my engineer. He stood up. The movement drew the eyes of the girls. Ada stopped poking her last bit of cake. Aisha froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Amina looked up, her calm eyes fixed on her father. Tund walked slowly to her side of the table. The restaurant seemed to hush, the other diners' conversations fading into a distant murmur. He went down on one knee. A soft, collective gasp rippled through the room, but Kayamika heard nothing. The world had narrowed to the man kneeling before her, his eyes pools of unwavering love and nervous hope. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew not a box, but a small, worn, patterned cardboard square. She recognized it instantly. It was a tile from the floor of their Surelier apartment, one he had secretly pried up and saved on the day they moved. He had polished it smooth. On its surface, he had fixed a simple, stunning solitaire diamond that caught the light and fractured it into 1,000 rainbows. Kayamika, he began again, his voice now clear and strong, carrying across the silent space. You have been my heart since the day I met you in that noisy lecture hall. You believed in my dreams when they were just scribbles on paper. You gave me our 3 miracles, our little goddesses who light up every corner of our world. He glanced at the triplets, whose 6 eyes were like saucers, utterly captivated. You have been my partner in building not just a home, but a life. This, he held up the tile with the glittering stone, is from our beginning, from the foundation. Will you do me the greatest honor? Will you be my Valentine, not just today, but forever? Will you build the rest of this life with me, officially, as my wife? Tears, instantaneous and overwhelming, spilled down Kayamika's cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of a joy so profound it had to overflow. It was the culmination of every late night, every saved naira, every whispered dream in the dark. It was the acknowledgement of their journey from maybe to this. Her hands flew to her mouth, then reached out to cradle his face, the face of the boy who had promised to build, and the man who had delivered. The triplets watched, mesmerized. They saw the way their mother's face transformed. The contentment of moments before was gone, replaced by something incandescent. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside her, and she was glowing from within, brighter than the crystal chandeliers, brighter than the diamond on the tile. Her smile was so wide, so radiant, it seemed to fill the entire restaurant. Yes, the word burst from her, a sob and a laugh intertwined. Yes, Tunde Kinwell. 1,000 times yes. He slid the unique ring onto her finger, then stood, pulling her into an embrace that lifted her off her feet. The restaurant erupted in applause and cheers. But the triplets didn't clap. They were still, absorbing the scene. Ada watched the way her mother's hands clutched at her father's back. Aisha saw the tears shining on her mother's smiling face. Amina felt the change in the very air. It was fizzy, like champagne, and warm like the morning sun. As their parents kissed, a deep, instinctual understanding settled into their 4-year-old hearts. They didn't know the words for it, but they felt the truth. This was a pinnacle. This was the key to a specific, unmatched kind of happiness. The sight of their mother, glowing like a star in her navy blue gown, her yes still hanging in the air, was imprinted on their souls. It was the visual definition of joy, and it was tied, irrevocably, to a question asked on Valentine's Day. It was the promise on a plate, made in a room full of strangers, witnessed by 3 little girls who now knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, what true love looked like when it finally spoke its name. Petals and promises. The months between the proposal and the wedding were a whirlwind spun from joy and meticulous lists. The pattern tile with its diamond sat proudly on Kayamika's finger, a constant, weighty reminder of their journey. It was a talking point for every visitor, a story she never tired of telling. But now, the focus shifted from the promise to the pageantry, a celebration not of a beginning, but of a glorious continuation. The triplets were at the very heart of the storm. Their role was decided instantly and unanimously: flower girls. Not just any flower girls, but a triumvirate of them. This necessitated not 1, but 3 miniature dresses, which became Kayamika's most cherished project. She forsook all other orders, spending evenings at her studio sketching. She settled on a design of airy, ivory silk, with puffed sleeves and delicate embroidery of tiny, interconnected vines and blossoms along the hem, a symbol of their intertwined lives. For their heads, she crafted simple circlets of fresh baby's breath and silk roses, small enough not to bother them, pretty enough to make them feel like princesses. Fittings were a lesson in controlled chaos. Ada stood stiff and important, as if being measured for a military uniform. Aisha spun and shuffled, more interested in the shiny pins than in standing still. Amina was placid, staring at her own reflection in the long mirror with quiet curiosity, occasionally reaching out to pat the soft fabric of her sister's dresses. "You will walk slowly," Kayamika instructed during a rehearsal in their living room. "You will scatter the petals from your baskets like you are feeding chickens, not like you are throwing ogbono seeds for a race. Gently, with smiles." "For Daddy?" Aisha asked, already clutching her practice basket of crumpled newspaper strips. "For Daddy and for me," Kayamika confirmed, her heart swelling. The wedding day dawned clear and golden, a benevolent sun smiling over Lagos. The ceremony was held in the garden of a modest event center in Acacia, bursting with the colors Kayamika loved: sun yellow, coral, and cream. Guests were a vibrant tapestry of both families, friends from the Surreal days, Tun's engineering colleagues, and Kayamika's fashion world clients. Back in the preparation room, the triplets were the epicenter of a different kind of energy. Mama Tund and Mama Kayamika, a temporary alliance forged for this day, buzzed around them. Mama Tund fussed with their sashes, her lips moving in silent prayer. Mama Kayamika dabbed a touch of sheer shea butter gloss on their cheeks, whispering, "You are the first joy today. You pave the way." When the music swelled, a live string quartet playing a sweet, Nigerian hymn, the large double doors to the garden aisle swung open. There, at the far end under a canopy of white fabric and flowers, stood Tund. He looked immaculate in a crisp, traditional abaya of white and gold, but his composure cracked the moment he saw what was coming towards him. First Ada, her basket held with grave seriousness, dropping a single petal, then 2, with precise concentration. Then Aisha, her smile so wide it threatened to eclipse her face, scattering petals with enthusiastic, bouncy arcs. Then Amina, her steps slow and serene, her eyes fixed on her father, letting petals drift from her fingers like slow-falling snow. A wave of audible delight swept through the guests. Cameras clicked like excited crickets. But Tun saw only his 3 little goddesses, transformed into ethereal little spirits of blessing, walking the path that would lead to him and to their mother. His eyes glistened, and he had to briefly look up at the sky to steady himself. Once they reached the front, they didn't know where to go. They clustered near Tun's legs, looking back expectantly. The music transitioned, and all eyes turned. Kayamika appeared. A collective breath was drawn. She was a vision in a gown of her own design, not a frothy confection, but a sleek column of ivory georgette with a high neckline and dramatic open back. The silhouette was pure modern elegance, but the detailing was deeply personal. The hem and sleeves were edged with an intricate lace pattern replicated from one of her own mother's old wedding galley. She carried a bouquet of simple yellow orchids, and on her face was that same incandescent glow from the restaurant, now amplified 1,000-fold by the love radiating from everyone present. As she walked towards him, Tund felt the completion of a circuit. The Surreal dream, the 3 heartbeats, the struggles, the triumphs, all of it connected right here, right now. When she took her place beside him, the triplets instinctively gathered around her skirt, a living, breathing part of the tableau. The ceremony was short, heartfelt. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and Tund was told he could kiss his bride, he did so gently, then immediately swept all 4 of his girls, his wife and his daughters, into a wide, laughing embrace. The garden exploded in cheers. The reception was a feast of music, laughter, and heartfelt speeches. The triplets, hyped on sugary cake and attention, finally crashed, asleep in a pile on a cushioned bench, their flower crowns askew, petals clinging to their hair and socks. Later, under a sky dusted with early stars, Tund and Kayamika stole a quiet moment. He held her close, her back against his chest, both looking at their sleeping daughters. "We did it," he murmured into her hair. "From that rainy day to this." "We did," she sighed, leaning into him. "It's official. Every brick, every beam. Ours." She twisted the unique ring on her finger, feeling the smooth tile beneath the gemstone. The promise on the plate had been planted, had grown, and today, it had bloomed into a garden of petals and promises. The foundation was now crowned. Their family, always whole in spirit, was now sealed in every way that mattered, with 3 little flower girls as the perfect, blessed witnesses to the forever that had finally begun. The silent slump. The 4 months following the wedding were a seamless, sunlit glide into a new rhythm. The title, husband and wife, fit Tund and Kayamika as naturally as breath. Their home in Bagada hummed with a deeper harmony, as if the official vows had tuned their shared life to a sweeter, more resonant frequency. The triplets, now proudly declaring, "My daddy married my mummy," to anyone who would listen, wore their flower girl memories like invisible crowns. Tund's career was a rocket in ascent. The telecom's headquarters project was a masterpiece of modern engineering, earning him not just financial reward, but prestigious industry accolades. He was now ENGR, a Kinwale, a name spoken with respect in corporate circles. Yet, he wore his success lightly. His greatest pride was still the workshop at home, where he'd build elaborate, winding marble runs for the girls, their delighted screams echoing as they watched the tiny spheres race and dip. Kayamika's atelier flourished. Her unique fusion of heritage and contemporary design became her signature. A major retail chain approached her for a collaboration, a move that promised to take Chia's elegance nationwide. Life was not just good, it was expansive, brimming with the tangible fruits of their long labor. But beneath the polished surface, a silent current was pulling. The pressure to provide, to build, to secure, the very drive that had constructed their world, never truly left Tund. It morphed. It became the anxiety of maintaining their newfound status, of funding the best schools for the girls, of ensuring Kayamika's business could scale without stumbling. He took on more advisory roles, sat on 2 new boards. His phone buzzed late into the night with emails from international partners across time zones. The headache started, mild at first, dismissed as stress. He began forgetting to eat lunch, subsisting on strong coffee and the sheer momentum of duty. Kayamika noticed. "Tund, you need to rest," she would say, her hand cool on his forehead after he'd spent hours hunched over blueprints. "The world will not end if you step away for a day." He would catch her hand and kiss it. "Soon, my love. Just after this deadline. Just after this launch." His smile was warm, but his eyes held a faint, relentless glitter of exertion. The morning it happened was deceptively normal. The girls, in their matching school pinafores, had been dropped off. Kayamika had a fitting with a high-profile bride-to-be. Tund had a crucial meeting at the site of his latest project, a state-of-the-art medical diagnostics center in Victoria Island. He kissed her goodbye at the door, a lingering kiss that tasted of mint toothpaste and unspoken promises for a quieter weekend ahead. At the site, all was controlled chaos. The foreman was pointing to a discrepancy in the electrical conduits on the third floor. Tund, helmet on, tablet in hand, climbed the scaffolding with his usual sure-footedness. The Lagos sun was fierce, glinting off the glass and steel skeleton of the building. He was explaining a solution, his voice clear and authoritative, pointing at a schematic. Then, the word stopped. In mid-sentence, his foreman, Kola, turned, expecting further instruction. He saw Tund's face go slack. The tablet slipped from his fingers, clattering on the concrete floor. A strange, soft sigh escaped Tund's lips, a sound of profound surprise rather than pain. Then, his legs simply folded beneath him. He slumped forward, a marionette with its strings cut, collapsing into Kola's arms before he could hit the ground. There was no drama, no clutching of the chest, no cry. Just a silent, swift subtraction. A switch flipped off. The site erupted into panic, shouts for help, a scramble for phones. An ambulance screamed its way through the dense Lagos traffic. But even as they loaded him in, even as the medics worked with frantic, mechanical urgency, a cold, intuitive dread had already settled in Kola's stomach. The engineer's face was too still. The vibrant energy that had animated him just moments before was utterly, terrifyingly absent. At the atelier, Kayamika's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, her hands full of ivory silk. Something, a sudden, inexplicable chill, made her pick up. The voice on the other end was ragged, formal, trying to hold back a wave of panic. "Madam, is this ENGR? Akinwale's wife?" The world, so solid and bright moments before, began to dissolve at the edges. The silk slipped from her fingers, a whisper against the polished floor, as the voice told her to come to the hospital. Now, it was urgent. She didn't remember the drive. The bustling streets of Allen Avenue blurred into a meaningless smear of color and sound. Her mind was a white, silent scream. Not now. Not after everything. Not when we just began. In the sterile, green-walled emergency room, a doctor with kind, tired eyes met her. He didn't need to say much. The words were simple, clinical, final. Massive cerebrovascular event. A catastrophic stroke. We did all we could. I am so sorry for your loss. It would have been very fast. Hypertension. The silent thief. The pressure he had carried to build their world had, in the end, breached the very vessel of his being. Kayamika did not cry out. She did not crumple. She stood perfectly still, the doctor's words washing over her like a wave of freezing lead, sealing her in a shell of instant, absolute numbness. She heard a distant, guttural moan, realizing dimly it had come from her own throat. Then, the bright lights of the hospital corridor telescoped into a tiny, blinding point before her vision, and the world, with all its promises and petals, went utterly, completely black. A mother's retreat. The world did not return in a gentle fade-in. It snapped back with a violent, chemical sting in her nostrils, smelling salts wielded by a harried nurse. Kayamika's eyes flew open to the unforgiving fluorescent lights of a hospital cubicle, the memory of the doctor's words already lodged in her heart like a cold, black stone. Grief did not wash over her, it replaced her. It evicted her soul and took up residence in her bones, her blood, her breath. They called it a catatonic state, a severe psychological retreat. To the doctors, it was a diagnosis. To Kayamika, it was the only possible response. The magnitude of the loss, Tund, her anchor, her co-architect, the father of her children, was a psychic tsunami. Her mind, to save itself from shattering, simply drew a curtain. It folded inwards, building a silent, still fortress where the pain could not reach because nothing could reach. She was moved to a private room. Her body obeyed basic commands. She could swallow broth. Her eyes would blink, but the vibrant woman who had walked down the aisle just months before was gone. In her place was a beautiful, breathing statue. Her gaze was fixed on some middle distance, seeing nothing, or perhaps seeing only the past, the rainy Surelier apartment, the three tiny faces in bassinets, the diamond glittering on a piece of tile. The triplets were brought to her. They stood by the high hospital bed in a silent, terrified row, holding the hands of a weeping Mama Kayamika. The vibrant yellow walls of the room felt like a cruel joke. "Mummy," Ada whispered, her voice small. She reached out and touched her mother's limp hand on the white sheet. It was warm, but it did not curl around her fingers. It did not move. Aisha, ever bold, climbed onto a chair to get closer to her mother's face. "Mummy, wake up. Daddy is gone." She said it plainly, testing the words, waiting for the reaction that always came when she said something shocking. Her mother's eyes did not flicker. Aisha's own boldness crumpled, replaced by a confusion so deep it stole her voice. Amina simply stood, her large eyes pooling with silent tears that traced clean paths down her cheeks. She didn't need to touch or speak. She absorbed the absence in the room, the hollow where her mother's spirit should have been. It felt even bigger than the absence of her father. The grandmothers, their own hearts broken into 1,000 pieces, shifted into a new, grim rotation. They moved into the hospital, a tag team of despair and duty. Mama Tund, her face etched with new lines, would sit for hours, stroking Kayamika's hair, speaking to her in Yoruba, as if she could hear. "Okomi died. Awan omo ri enfei. My daughter, rise. Your children need you." Mama Kayamika would sing the old lullabies, her voice cracking on the familiar melodies she had once sung to her daughter and then to her granddaughters. She would massage Kayamika's hands and feet with warm shea butter, as if trying to knead life back into her. And the girls came. Every day, their world had been reduced to this room with its faint smell of antiseptic and sorrow. They stopped asking to go to the park to watch cartoons. Their universe had two poles, their grandparents' temporary, grief-stricken care, and this still, silent mother. They developed rituals. Ada would bring her latest drawing, a house, a sun, a man with a big smile, and prop it on the bedside table, changing it daily. "For you, Mummy," she would announce, her voice slowly losing its expectation of a reply. Aisha, refusing to believe in silence, would chatter. She'd recount everything that happened at the grandparents' house, the food they ate, the bird she saw. She'd pause, waiting for a laugh, a nod, a scolding. The only answer was the hum of the air conditioner. Amina's ritual was the quietest. She would carefully arrange her mother's fingers around her own small hand and just sit, breathing in time with the slow, mechanical rise and fall of Kayamika's chest. She was anchoring herself to the only piece of her mother she could still reach. Weeks bled into months. The vibrant dresses in Kayamika's wardrobe went untouched. The workshop in Bagada gathered dust. The world outside moved on, but in room 307, time was frozen. The girl's 5th birthday came and went with a somber cake in the hospital cafeteria, their eyes constantly darting to the hallway that led to their mother's room. The once lucky goddesses of good luck now felt like carriers of a terrible curse. Their vibrant light, which had once seemed to make everything grow, could not penetrate the deep, dark well where their mother had hidden. They didn't understand catatonia, but they understood absence. And they knew, with the pure, relentless logic of a child's heart, that they had seen her present before. They had seen her lit up, joyous, alive. It was Ada who finally gave the feeling a shape, one afternoon as they colored on the floor of the reception area. She put down her crayon and looked at her sisters. Mummy was brightest, she stated, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration, when Daddy asked her to be his Valentine. Aisha stopped mid-scribble. Amina looked up, her crayon hovering. "That's the happy she needs," Ada continued, the idea crystallizing. Not just happy. That Valentine happy. The concept was a seed. Fragile, illogical, born of desperate love and a child's literal memory. But it took root. In their shared silence, in their linked gazes, a plan began to form. It was not a plan of medicine or science. It was a plan of magic, of memory, of trying to recreate the exact conditions of a light so bright it had once made their mother shine like the sun itself. They didn't know how, but they knew when. They had to find a Valentine, the memory of light. The sterile reality of the hospital became the triplets' entire world. The cheerful murals of animals on the walls felt like a mockery. The bustling nurses in their colorful scrubs were background noise to the constant, silent soundtrack of their mother's absence. The girl's 6th birthday came and went, acknowledged with a small, store-bought cake in the family waiting area, its sweetness tasting like nothing. They were 6 now, but felt both older and younger, ancient in their grief, infantile in their helplessness. Their grandparents' love was a heavy blanket, warm but smothering with its own scent of tears and exhaustion. Mama Tund and Mama Kayamika moved through their days with a mechanical determination, ensuring the girls were fed, bathed, and brought to the hospital, but the light in their own eyes had dimmed. The tragedy had etched a permanent strain on their faces. In the quiet moments, when the grandmothers dozed in the uncomfortable vinyl chairs or stepped out to make difficult phone calls, the triplets held their own counsel. They would gather in a corner of the room or by the large window overlooking the car park, their heads close together. "She can hear us," Aisha would insist, her voice a stubborn whisper. "Yesterday, when I told her about the butterfly, her eyelid moved. A little. That's just sleeping," Ada would counter, her practicality sharpened by fear. But she wanted to believe it too. Amina rarely spoke in these huddles. Instead, she observed. She watched the steady, artificial rise and fall of their mother's chest, the neutral set of her mouth. She missed the smile lines, the crinkles at the corners of her eyes when she laughed. She missed the aliveness. The memory Ada had voiced became their scripture, their singular point of hope. They replayed it like a cherished film clip, polishing it with each retelling. "Remember the restaurant?" Ada would begin. "It was shiny," Aisha would add. "And there was music," Amina would whisper. "Daddy knelt down. Like this." Aisha would demonstrate on the linoleum floor. "He had the stone on the tile," Ada said, struggling with the memory of the unique proposal. "And Mummy." Here, all three would grow quiet, their faces softening with the shared, vivid image. "She got bright." Amina would finish, her voice full of awe. That was the word they had settled on. Bright. Not just happy, not just smiling. She had become a source of light, a human lantern. It was a specific, peak joy, and it was tied irrevocably to Valentine's Day, to a question, to a promise. As the bleak January days dragged into February, a desperate energy began to crackle between them. The sight of early Valentine's displays in the hospital gift shop, tacky red teddy bears and heart-shaped balloons, was no longer a background detail. It was a sign, a ticking clock. "We need to make her bright again," Ada declared one afternoon, watching a nurse adjust the 4-drip. "We need a Valentine for her." The logic was flawless in the economy of childhood. Cause: Valentine's proposal. Effect: blinding maternal joy. Problem: deep, unresponsive sleep. Solution: a Valentine. But how? They were 6. They had no money. They knew no men except doctors, nurses, and their grieving grandfathers. The idea was a castle built on clouds. Then, Mama Kayamika, trying to inject some normalcy, brought them a small bunch of pink carnations from the market. "For your mother," she said wearily. "For Valentine's. Maybe the smell will be nice for her." The flowers became their totem. They held them during their visits, placing them on the bedside table, hoping the faint, peppery scent would trigger something. On the morning of February 14th, they claimed the flowers for their own mission. They stood in the relatively quiet hospital reception, the carnations clutched in their hands like sacred objects. They closed their eyes, as they'd seen their grandmothers do in prayer. "God," Ada whispered, the de facto speaker. "Please let Mummy wake up. Let her be bright again. We need a Valentine for her. Please send one." They were lost in their plea, a small island of faith in a sea of institutional beige. They didn't hear the automatic door slide open. They didn't notice the tall figure entering, trailed by a discreet assistant. It was a scent that found them first. A familiar, beloved, impossible scent. Spicy oud, clean sandalwood, a hint of citrus, the exact, distinctive cologne their father had always worn. It was the smell of safety, of bedtime stories, of being swung high in the air. 3 small heads snapped up in perfect unison. For a breathtaking, heart-stopping second, 6 eyes saw not a stranger, but the ghost of a promise. The broad shoulders, the dark skin, the back of a well-groomed head as the man spoke to the receptionist. Hope, wild and irrational, flared like a struck match. Then, as he half-turned, reality crashed back. It was not Daddy. The face was similar in its handsomeness, but older, sharper, etched with a different kind of experience. The hope didn't die, It mutated. It transformed into a daring, crystal-clear directive. He had Daddy's smell. Therefore, he could be the key. Ada, without a word to her sisters, took the first step. Aisha and Amina fell in beside her, a united front. They marched towards the man, their little feet silent on the polished floor, their matching dresses suddenly feeling like uniforms for a cosmic mission. They held out their flowers, a small, hopeful bundle of pink against the vast, indifferent white of the hospital. The memory of the light was their map. This stranger, with his familiar scent, was their only compass. They would ask, and in asking, they would set in motion a miracle they could not yet imagine. The scent in the hospital air. The hospital reception was a liminal space, a corridor of muted anxieties and hushed conversations. The triplets stood near a potted plastic fern, their small hands tightly wrapped around the stems of the pink carnations. The blooms were beginning to wilt at the edges, mirroring the frayed hope in their hearts. They had pressed their foreheads together, a triangle of desperation, and prayed the simplest, hardest prayer they knew. The swish of the automatic glass doors was a constant background noise, but this time it carried in a different energy. A cool draft of conditioned air, tinged with car exhaust, and the distant smell of roasting plantain from a street vendor, swept in. And then, cutting through it all, came the fragrance. It was not a mere smell, it was a memory made tangible. Oud, deep and resinous like ancient wood. Sandalwood, creamy and comforting. A bright, clean slice of bergamot. It was the scent of Tun's Sunday best, of his strong neck when they hugged him goodnight, of his pillow after he'd left for work. It was the aroma of Daddy. 3 heads jerked up as one. For a millisecond, the world stopped, rewound, and played the wrong, beautiful tape. Their eyes, wide and disbelieving, locked onto the source. A tall, imposing man in a flawlessly tailored navy blue agbada, the fine embroidery catching the fluorescent light. He was speaking to the receptionist, his voice a low, confident baritone, his profile sharp and focused. Amina's breath hitched. Aisha's hand flew to her mouth. Ada's entire body went rigid with a shock that was both agonizing and electrifying. It wasn't him. The realization was a physical blow, a deflation that made the room seem to dim. But the scent lingered, wrapping around them like a haunting. It was too exact, too specific to be a coincidence. In their 6-year-old theology, where logic was intertwined with magic, this could not be meaningless. A man who smelled like their father, appearing in this place of stasis on this day, could not be an accident. He was an answer, a sign. Their shared gaze, wordless and profound, communicated everything. The memory of the light, the need for a Valentine. This was the vessel. He finished his query, visiting hours for the private wing, where his brother was recovering from surgery, and turned, his expensive leather shoes whispering on the floor. He was about to stride towards the elevators when his path was blocked. 3 small figures had materialized before him, a wall of solemn eyes and wilted flowers. He paused, a faint, bemused smile touching his lips. He was Kanalade Banjo, a man accustomed to blocking mergers and acquisitions, not to being intercepted by kindergartners. Ada, the spearhead, swallowed the lump of grief and hope in her throat. She extended the bunch of carnations, their petals trembling slightly. Her voice, when it came, was clear but thin, like a fine glass thread. "Sir." The word hung in the air. "Please, will you be our mummy's Valentine?" Cunnell's bemused smile widened. He had nieces and nephews. He was used to their adorable, nonsensical requests. He saw the matching dresses, the identical, earnest faces, and assumed it was a cute hospital prank, perhaps a school project. He crouched down, bringing himself to their level, the rich fabric of his agbada pooling around him. It was a gesture meant to humor them. "Is that so?" he said, his voice kind but patronizing. "And why should I be your mummy's Valentine? Doesn't she already have one?" It was the wrong question. It opened the floodgate. Aisha, her boldness fueled by pain, shook her head violently. "Her Valentine is gone. He went to heaven." The words were blunt, unvarnished. Amina's eyes, pools of silent sorrow, welled up with fresh tears that spilled over and traced shiny paths down her cheeks. She didn't speak, but her tears were more eloquent than any speech. And Ada, still holding out the flowers, her arm beginning to ache, told him. The words tumbled out in a rushed, jumbled cascade. "Our daddy, He made her bright. He asked her on Valentine's, and she got so bright and happy. Then he died. And now she's sleeping and won't wake up. For months and months. She needs a Valentine. To be bright again. To wake up. Connell's smile vanished. The patronizing glint in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a dawning, staggering comprehension. He was no longer looking at 3 cute children. He was looking at 3 tiny, heartbroken sovereigns of a collapsed kingdom, standing in the ruins, offering a peace treaty made of flowers. The tears in Amina's eyes were not those of a child denied a sweet. They were the profound, quiet grief of a soulmate lost. The desperation in Ada's voice was not a play for attention. It was the last, frayed strand of hope. He looked from one identical, pleading face to the next. The scent of his cologne, now a cruel coincidence, hung in the space between them. He saw the hospital bands on their tiny wrists, the faint shadows under their eyes that spoke of a childhood spent in waiting rooms. The billionaire, the dealmaker, the man who calculated risks for a living, felt something ancient and visceral crack open inside him. This was not a business proposition. This was a sacred petition. Very slowly, he reached out. His large, well-manicured hand enveloped Ada's small one that held the flowers. He didn't take them. He simply steadied them. "Okay," he said, and his voice was different now. Softer, stripped of all its power, humbled. "Okay, I will be your mummy's Valentine." In that moment, under the sterile hospital lights, a contract was signed. Not on paper, but on the shared, shattered ground of human need. The scent in the air had brought them together, but it was the raw, unvarnished truth in 3 pairs of eyes that bound him to a promise he did not yet understand. The brave request. The word, "okay," hung in the antiseptic air, a simple syllable that fell to the triplets like the first chord of a miracle. Colonel Adebanjo remained crouched before them, his expensive agbada brushing the sterile floor, his world irrevocably tilted. The corporate boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations that defined his existence had not prepared him for this. A battlefield of grief measured in small, trembling hands and wilting carnations. He looked at them, truly looked. He saw the faint, identical smudges of fatigue under their eyes, the careful way their grandmothers had braided their hair now beginning to fray at the ends. He saw the fierce, desperate hope in Ada's gaze, the raw vulnerability in Aisha's, the profound, silent plea in Amina's. These were not children playing a game. They were ambassadors from a land of loss, and they had just presented him with the most important diplomatic mission of his life. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice low. He settled fully onto one knee, ignoring the faint protest from his tailored trousers. He was now at their complete level, a supplicant before 3 tiny queens. Encouraged, the story poured out in a more organized torrent, led by Ada, punctuated by Aisha, and silently affirmed by Amina's nods. They spoke of their father, the engineer who built things. They described the bright restaurant proposal with the sparkling tile. They told him about the wedding with the petals, their matching dresses. Then, the terrible, simple subtraction. He slumped. And finally, the long, gray stillness of their mother, who slept and would not wake up. 6 months, Ada finished, her small voice grave. The doctors talk, but she doesn't hear. But we think, if she had a Valentine, like before. Connell listened, his businessman's mind, trained to assess narratives, recognizing no flaw in their logic. Their cause and effect was pristine. Their solution was audacious. And their faith was absolute. "What is your mother's name?" he asked gently. "Kayamika." The 3 voices chorused, a soft, loving whisper. A strange, almost electric jolt passed through Connell, so subtle he dismissed it as a trick of empathy. Kayamika. A beautiful, common name. It couldn't be. "And your names?" "I am Ada. I am Aisha. Amina." The quiet one barely breathed it. He committed them to memory. Ada, Aisha, Amina. The Akinwale triplets. He looked at the sad little flowers in Ada's hand. This would not do. Not for a mission of this magnitude. The memory they described, their father's gesture, was one of breathtaking, personal thoughtfulness, a tile from their first home. To replicate its spirit for a stranger was impossible, but to honor the scale of its intended joy, that he could attempt. He stood up, pulling his phone from his pocket. The triplets watched, eyes wide, as he switched from Connell the listener to Connell the executor. "Emika," he said into the phone, his tone now crisp, quiet, and commanding. Cancel my 3 p.m., clear the rest of the day. I need you to do something for me. I'm at St. Augustine's. I need the best event stylist in Lagos, the one who did the Calabar Festival launch, here within the hour. I need a florist, not just a shop, the one who supplies the Ikoyi Club. Every white and gold orchid, every garden rose they have. Yes, tonight. I also need a small, professional ensemble. A trumpeter, a cellist. Something hopeful, not loud, gentle, and find a toy store. I need 3 of the most beautiful, most comforting stuffed animals you can find. Different ones. Yes, immediately. Each instruction was a brick in the architecture of a dream. The triplets listened, their earlier desperation slowly being replaced by awe. This was not just a man agreeing. This was a man assembling. He ended the call and looked back down at them. We will do it properly, he said, a new light in his own eyes. But you must be my guides. You must show me the way to her, and you must tell me if it feels right. They nodded, a solemn, unified motion. First, he said, taking the weary carnations from Ada's hand. We need better flowers. Will you come with me to choose them? He extended his hands. After a moment's hesitation, Aisha slipped her hand into his left. Amina, after a glance at Ada, took his right. Ada, the leader, walked just ahead, a small general leading a billionaire to war against despair. As they walked out of the hospital's main doors towards where his driver waited, the ordinary world felt surreal. The man who commanded boardrooms was now being led by 3 6-year-olds, their brave request blossoming into a plan that was as extravagant as it was tender. They had asked for a Valentine. They were getting an army of beauty, marshaled by a general who had unexpectedly found a cause worth every penny and every second. The mission was no longer just to wake Kayamika, it was to prove to Ada, Aisha, and Amina that their faith could move more than mountains. It could move a billionaire's heart, and with it, heaven and earth. A billionaire's promise. The world outside the hospital was a jarring symphony of honking horns and vibrant street life, a stark contrast to the hushed sterility of the wards. Kunnel's driver, Emeka, a man of impeccable discretion, barely blinked as his boss emerged not alone, but with 3 small, serious-eyed girls in tow. He simply held the door of the sleek, dark SUV open, his face a mask of professional calm. Inside the quiet, leather-scented cabin, the triplets huddled together on the spacious seat, their eyes wide. This was a different universe from their grandparents' battered car. Kunnel sat across from them, his phone already buzzing with confirmations. First, the flowers, he announced, as if orchestrating a military campaign. He glanced at the girls. What were her favorites? Your mother's. The question stumped them for a moment. Their mother's world had been one of fabric and thread, of their laughter and their father's voice. Flowers were decorations, not passions. Yellow, Amina whispered suddenly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the engine. Both her sisters turned to her. In her wedding pictures, she held yellow flowers. A memory surfaced for Kunnel, a fleeting, sun-drenched image from a university garden long ago. I love yellow orchids, a younger voice laughed. They look like captured sunlight. He shook the ghost away. A coincidence. Yellow orchids it is, he said, his voice firm. He relayed the instruction to Emeka up front. Their next stop was not a florist shop, but a sprawling, cool greenhouse in an upscale part of Ikoyi. It was a kingdom of scent and color. The triplets, holding hands, walked silently past towering birds of paradise and cascades of purple bougainvillea. The florist, an elegant woman who clearly knew Kunnel as a valued client, led them to a cooler where rows of exquisite yellow orchids stood like graceful, silent dancers. Are those good? Kunnel asked the girls, uncharacteristically seeking approval. Ada studied them with a critical eye, then nodded, a little gesture that carried tremendous weight. They are bright, she pronounced. It was the highest praise. From there, the mission accelerated with a breathtaking, financial-fueled efficiency. They stopped at a luxurious toy store on Admiralty Way. Kunnel didn't just buy 3 stuffed animals. He had the bemused manager bring out the most exquisite ones. A silken-furred lion with a calm, wise face for Ada. A plush, adventurous-looking monkey for Aisha. A soft, gray elephant with kind, embroidered eyes for Amina. The girls clutched them, not as gifts, but as talismans, new friends for the vigil. Next, a discreet meeting with an event stylist in a chic office. Kunnel laid out the bizarre, poignant brief. A hospital room, a comatose woman, 3 children, a need for an atmosphere of waking joy. The stylist, a creative soul, listened, her initial confusion melting into inspired resolve. She began sketching, soft, gauzy white and gold fabrics to drape the clinical walls and ceiling, creating a canopy. Countless tiny, warm fairy lights to mimic stars. A pathway of rose petals from the door to the bedside. It cannot look like a funeral, Connell stated. It must look like a beginning. Through it all, the triplets were his silent counsel. He showed them fabric swatches, too dark, Aisha said, of a navy blue. He played a sample from the cellist he'd hired. Amina nodded. So it's gentle enough, he confirmed. He was building their vision, brick by golden brick. As evening began to paint the Lego sky in shades of orange and purple, they returned to St. Augustine's. The hospital administration, after a combination of significant donation promises and the sheer compelling madness of the plan, had granted highly restricted access. A discreet team moved like elves into room 307, transforming it under the watchful, anxious eyes of Mama Kayamika and Mama Tund, who had been briefed with tearful, bewildered hope by the girls. Connell changed in a private family lounge. He shed his corporate agbada for a simpler, impeccably cut navy blue suit. Elegant, but not bridal, serious, but open. He looked at himself in the mirror, a billionaire preparing for the most unconventional merger of his life. He sprayed a hint of his cologne, the very scent that had started it all, and paused. Was this cruel? A trick of the senses? But the girls had identified it as a key. It was part of the arsenal. Finally, he stood in the now transformed hallway outside Kayamika's room. The clinical strip lights were off. The corridor was lit only by the soft glow spilling from the open door, where golden fabric now billowed gently in the air-conditioned breeze. The cellist and trumpeter, positioned discreetly outside, began a soft, hauntingly beautiful rendition of a familiar Nigerian love song, OBM. Connell felt a nervousness he hadn't known in decades. This wasn't a pitch. This was a prayer performed as theater. He looked down at his guides. Ada, Aisha, and Amina stood before him, washed in the golden light. They had changed into their best dresses, their hair rebraided by their weeping grandmothers. They held their new stuffed animals and baskets now filled with fresh yellow rose petals. Their little faces were set in expressions of absolute, terrifying faith. "Are you ready?" he asked them, his voice barely a whisper. They nodded, not speaking. They were ready. They had been ready for 6 months. "Then lead the way," he said. Ada took a deep breath. Aisha squared her shoulders. Amina closed her eyes for a second, as if gathering strength. Then, as one, they turned and began to walk, scattering the yellow petals before them on the clean hospital floor. The music swelled gently, tenderly behind them. Connell followed, a step behind, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was no longer a billionaire fulfilling a charitable whim. He was a man walking a path laid by petals and pure faith, into a room where he had promised to be a Valentine, hoping against hope to trade a gesture for a miracle. The promise had been made. Now, it was time to see if love, in its most desperate and indirect form, could indeed perform the impossible. The procession of hope. The transformation of the hospital corridor was so complete it felt like stepping through a portal. The harsh, impersonal white walls were veiled in cascades of soft, champagne-colored gauze that caught and softened the light from hundreds of tiny, warm fairy lights woven into the fabric. The air, usually heavy with antiseptic and anxiety, now carried the delicate, honeyed scent of yellow orchids and gardenias. The cello's melody, rich and deep, wove around the clear, poignant call of the trumpet, playing not a fanfare, but a gentle, persistent summons. At the head of this newly sacred space walked Ada, Aisha, and Amina. They were no longer just 3 little girls in their Sunday best. They were priestesses of hope, acolytes of memory. With solemn, synchronized steps, they reached into their small wicker baskets and scattered the velvety yellow rose petals onto the polished linoleum floor. Each petal was a syllable of their prayer, a piece of the golden pathway they were laying back to their mother. Their faces were masks of fierce concentration. Ada's jaw was set, her eyes fixed on the open door of room 307 ahead. Aisha's usual bounce was replaced by a steady, deliberate pace, her hand rhythmically dipping and rising. Amina's movements were the gentlest, her petals drifting down like sighs, her gaze inward, as if she were mentally pulling her mother from the depths by sheer will. Behind them, a respectful pace back, walked Kanalade Banjo. He felt like an intruder in this holy procession, yet he was its ordained center. The soft light glinted off the simple, elegant bouquet of yellow orchids he carried. The familiar scent of his cologne, which had seemed like such a personal choice this morning, now felt like a borrowed costume, a key he'd been unwittingly carrying for this lock. He watched the small, straight backs of the girls, and his own nervousness was eclipsed by a surge of protective awe. They believed this would work. Their faith was a tangible force, thickening the air, making the music sound truer, the lights burn brighter. Nurses and orderlies had gathered at a respectful distance, some wiping their eyes, others holding their phones aloft, not to intrude, but to witness. The grandmothers, Mama Kayamika and Mama Tund, stood clutching each other's hands in the doorway of a nearby waiting room, their faces streams of silent tears. This was the girls' moment, their wild, beautiful, desperate gamble, and no adult dared interrupt. The procession reached the threshold of room 307. The girls paused, a tiny, unified front. They looked inside. The transformation here was the most profound. The medical equipment, the beeping monitor, the forestand, had been pushed to the periphery, discreetly draped in the same soft fabric. The bed seemed to float in a sea of white and gold. Canopies of gauze hung from the ceiling, creating a sense of a sacred tent. Vases overflowing with yellow orchids stood like sentinels around the room. And in the center of it all lay Kayamika, as still as ever, her face peaceful in the ambient glow. For a heartbeat, the triplets' resolve seemed to waver. The sight of her stillness, even in this beautiful setting, was a familiar dagger. Then Ada took a deep, shuddering breath. Aisha grabbed her sister's hand. Amina reached for the other. Together, they stepped across the doorway. They didn't rush to the bed. They completed their ritual. Walking slowly to the bedside, they finished scattering the circle of petals around her, creating a sunrise of yellow on the floor. Then, they stepped back, forming a small half-circle at the foot of the bed. They looked up at Kunal, their eyes huge and full of a silent, urgent trust. "It's your turn." Kunal moved forward. The music from the corridor seemed to follow him in, wrapping around the moment. He stood beside the bed, looking down at the woman he had promised to be a Valentine to. In the golden light, she was strikingly beautiful, her features calm but absent. He felt the absurdity, the immense weight of the expectation. He was a stranger, acting out a part in a fairy tale written by grieving children. But he had made a promise. To them. He set the bouquet of orchids carefully on the bedside table, next to a framed drawing of a smiling family that Ada had made. Then, he did what felt instinctive, not grand. He didn't kneel. He simply leaned close, so his voice would be for her alone, but loud enough for the little ears straining to hear. "Kayamika," he said, his voice low and clear, breaking the name into its musical parts. Chiamaka. He saw, or imagined he saw, the faintest flicker of an eyelash. Emboldened, he continued, speaking the script the girls had unknowingly provided. "Your daughters, Ada, Aisha, and Amina, they have brought you a Valentine." He paused, the word feeling both alien and profound. "They remember how bright you can be. They miss your light. We all do." He wasn't sure who we all was, but it felt true. "It's time to wake up now, Kayamika. Your Valentines are waiting." He reached out then, not to take her hand, but to gently place his own over hers where it lay on the white sheet. A point of contact. A human bridge. In the silence that followed his words, the only sounds were the soft, lingering notes of the trumpet and the collective, held breath of the room. The triplets stood frozen, their stuffed animals clutched to their chests, their entire beings focused on their mother's face, waiting for the dawn they had orchestrated, prayed for, and believed in with every atom of their hearts. The procession was over. The offering was made. Now, they waited for the altar to speak. Eyes open, past awakens. The moment stretched, thin and taut as a violin string. The last, yearning note from the trumpet faded into the gauze-draped silence. Kunal's hand remained over Kayamika's, a connection of warmth against stillness. The triplets did not blink, their lungs frozen mid-breath. The world had narrowed to the space between Kayamika's closed eyelids and the waking world. Then, a tremor. so faint it could have been a trick of the dancing fairy lights. A tiny, almost imperceptible twitch of the index finger beneath Connell's palm. He stiffened, his own breath catching. Another tremor, stronger this time, a ripple across the back of her hand. Her brows, so serene for so long, drew together in a faint, confused furrow. A soft, ragged sigh escaped her lips, the first sound of her own volition in 6 months. It was the sound of someone swimming upward from a very deep place. Her eyelids fluttered, not the random movements of deep sleep, but a slow, deliberate struggle. Lashes lifted, dipped, lifted again. They revealed eyes that were clouded, unfocused, swimming in the blur of prolonged darkness and the soft, golden haze that now surrounded her. She blinked, slowly, as if her eyes were new. The light, gentle as it was, seemed intense. Her gaze drifted past Connell's face, past the canopy of gold, and landed on the 3 small figures at the foot of the bed. The triplets, her daughters. A jolt went through her, a mother's primal recognition that bypassed all reason. Her lips moved, a dry, soundless shaping of a word. Then, a whisper, rusted from disuse, fragile as a moth's wing. Ada? Aisha? Amina? The sound of their names, in her voice, their mother's voice, was a detonation of pure, silent joy in the girls. They surged forward as one, but stopped short, afraid to break the spell. Tears, which had been held back for so long, now poured down their cheeks in silent rivers. Kayamika's eyes, clearing moment by moment, shifted. They moved from the tears on her daughters' faces upward to the man standing beside her. The man whose hand covered hers. The scent, that beloved, impossible scent of oud and sandalwood, filled her senses, weaving a direct line through the fog in her mind. It was the scent of safety, of love, of Tund. Her vision swam, the present layering over a ghost. The profile, the solid presence, the smell, it coalesced into the only answer her newly awakened heart could comprehend. A sob broke from her chest, raw and aching. Tund, she breathed, the name a plea and a wonder. Her other hand lifted, trembling violently, reaching to touch his face, to confirm the miracle. You came back? Connell's heart shattered and swelled all at once. He saw the devastating hope in her eyes, the love meant for another man directed at him. He captured her trembling hand before it reached his cheek, holding it gently between both of his own. He leaned closer, his voice so soft only she could hear, wanting to ground her without destroying her. No, he whispered, the word infinitely kind. It's not Tund. He saw the confusion, the dawning devastation in her gaze. Look at me, Kayamika. Look closely. He moved his head so the light fell directly on his features. She blinked, her focus sharpening, struggling to reconcile the scent with the face. The lines were different. The set of the mouth. The eyes held a history she didn't know, but in their depth, something else flickered, something old and long forgotten began to stir. Her breath hitched. The ghost of Tund's face receded, like a double exposure fading. And beneath it, another ghost emerged. From a different life. A life of lecture halls, of youthful dreams, of a love that was intense and truncated. A face younger, less assured, but with the same intense gaze. Her lips parted in a new kind of shock, one that pierced the lingering haze of grief. Connell, she whispered, his name a question mark from a 20-year-old sentence. Connell Adebanjo. In the doorway, Mama Kayamika let out a choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. She remembered the name. She remembered the sharp, handsome boy from the University of Lagos who had broken her daughter's heart when he vanished abroad. The triplets watched, utterly bewildered. Their mother was awake. She was speaking, but she was looking at their Valentine not with the bright, joyful recognition they'd imagined, but with a stunned, bewildered recognition of a different kind. The air, charged with the miracle of waking, now crackled with a new, unfathomable electricity. Connell, still holding her hand, felt the past crash into the present with the force of a tidal wave. The coincidence of the name he'd dismissed now stood before him, flesh and blood and awakened soul. The girl he'd lost, the woman he'd been sent to save. The circle was not just closed. It was intertwined in a way that defied all logic. He nodded slowly, 1,000 unsaid words in his eyes. Yes, Kayamika. It's me. Her awake eyes searched his. moving from the shock of his presence to the tears on her daughter's faces, to the surreal, beautiful room, to the lingering, beloved scent on his skin that was both a comfort and a confusion. Two parallel strands of her life, her first great love and her last, had just collided in a hospital room, brought together by the desperate, loving conspiracy of three little girls and a bouquet of yellow orchids. She was awake, but the world she had returned to was not the one she had left. When yesterday meets today, silence, thick and electric, filled the golden room. It was a silence of aftermath and awe, of a miracle that had birthed a mystery. Kayamika's gaze remained locked with Cunnel's, a tempest of emotions swirling in her newly awakened eyes. Disbelief, the lingering ghost of grief, and the dawning, staggering recognition of a man she had buried in the archives of her heart long before she had to bury a husband. The triplets stood frozen, their celebration suspended. This was not the bright, sunlit joy of the restaurant. This was something deeper, more complex, a current of energy between the adults they could feel but not understand. Ada looked from her mother's face to Cunnel's, her young mind trying to recalculate the plan. The Valentine had worked. Mummy was awake. But why did she look so shocked? It was Mama Kayamika who broke the spell. She moved from the doorway like a ship cutting through a still sea, her tears now of a different nature, shock mingled with a mother's protective instinct. She went to the bedside opposite Cunnel, taking her daughter's other hand. Kayamika? NNEM, can you hear me? Do you know where you are? Kayamika's eyes slowly pulled away from Cunnel's, focusing on her mother's familiar, worried face. The present began to anchor itself. The hospital bed, the tubes, the faint, chronic ache in her own body from months of stillness, and the crushing, leaden memory that rushed in to fill the void left by the fog. Tund. Gone. A moan escaped her, low and full of fresh pain. She squeezed her mother's hand. Mama. Tund. I know. Inini, I know. Mama Kayamika soothed, her voice breaking. But you are back. You are here. Your children are here. As if summoned by the words, the triplets found their courage. They surged forward the final few steps, a wave of little arms and wet faces pressing against the bed rails. Mummy, Mummy, you woke up. Aisha cried, the words tumbling out. Kayamika's attention shattered, dispersing into three. She looked at her daughters, really looked at them for the first time in half a year. They were taller. Their faces were thinner, their eyes older, shadowed with an experience no child should know. A fresh, searing grief, this one for the time she had lost with them, joined the cavernous one for Tund. She tried to lift her arms, but they were weak, trembling. My babies, my strong, strong girls. They reached for her, their small hands patting her face, her arms, weaving through her fingers, a physical verification of her return. Through the forest of their embrace, her eyes found Cunnel's again. He had taken a step back, giving space to the family, but he was still there, a solid, confounding presence in his elegant suit amidst the medical setting. The questions were a silent scream in her look. The girls, Cunnel began, his voice quiet, respectful. He gestured gently towards Ada, Aisha, and Amina. They asked me to be your Valentine, to help you wake up. It sounded absurd spoken aloud. A billionaire Valentine, hired by 6-year-olds. Yet, the evidence was all around them. The flowers, the lights, the lingering music, the sheer, improbable fact of her conscious mind. They remembered, Kayamika whispered, her voice gaining a thread of strength as she understood. She looked at her daughters, her heart breaking and mending all at once. They remembered the restaurant. Ada nodded vigorously, her tears still falling. We wanted you bright again. Like before. Kayamika closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their love, their stubborn, beautiful faith. When she opened them, she looked back at Cunnel, the past and present now on a collision course in her mind. And you just agreed?